Millionaire CEO sees a little girl playing the violin for $2. He pays, she plays, and tears fall. Alexander Gray, a self-made millionaire, had built his empire from the ground up, a testament to his relentless drive and sharp intellect. Yet, for all his wealth and power, he remained a man of deep humility and compassion, a rare blend in a world driven by profit margins and corporate conquests. Despite his towering success, his heart had always been drawn to the small, genuine moments of life. He often found himself quietly supporting the less fortunate, slipping large bills into the trembling hands of struggling mothers or funding the dreams of young, hopeful entrepreneurs. But even with all his success, a void remained, a silent ache for a deeper connection, the kind he found only in the gaze of his beautiful, intelligent secretary, Emily. Emily was unlike anyone he had ever known. She possessed a rare combination of grace, intelligence, and quiet strength. Her laughter had a way of echoing in his mind long after their meetings ended, and her kindness left a warmth in the cold marble halls of his corporate tower. They had worked side by side for years, their connection growing stronger with each passing day. He admired her dedication, the way she carried herself with effortless elegance, and the quiet resilience that shone in her eyes. She became his confidant, his friend, and eventually the woman who stirred emotions he had long thought buried beneath the weight of his ambitions. Their love blossomed slowly, like the first rays of dawn breaking over a still, dark sea. Alexander found himself lingering in her office doorways, drawn to the gentle curve of her smile and the musical lilt of her voice as she organized his chaotic world with precision and grace. She had a habit of humming softly when she thought no one was listening, a particular melody that seemed to cling to his soul, whispering of long, slow dances and whispered promises. He felt his heart quicken each time their eyes met across the polished conference tables, a silent conversation passing between them, more profound than any corporate strategy or quarterly report. After a year of silent admiration, Alexander could no longer ignore the pull he felt toward her. One rainy evening, as the city lights shimmered through the floor-to-ceiling windows of his office, he found himself standing beside her desk. She looked up, her eyes wide with gentle surprise, and in that moment, he felt a wave of courage wash over him. He reached for her hand, his heart pounding in his chest. "Emily," he whispered, his voice uncharacteristically uncertain. "I cannot imagine my life without you. Will you marry me?" For a heartbeat, the world seemed to hold its breath, the soft hum of the city below fading into a quiet stillness. Tears filled Emily's eyes, her lips parting in a stunned, breathless smile. She whispered, "Yes," her voice breaking into a soft, joyous laugh as she reached up to touch his cheek. In that moment, the weight of his solitary existence fell away, replaced by the warmth of her embrace and the promise of a future filled with shared dreams and whispered secrets. Their wedding night was a moment frozen in time, a tender, passionate celebration of a love that had defied the cold logic of the corporate world. Beneath the soft glow of the moonlight streaming through the tall windows of their penthouse suite, Alexander held Emily close, their bodies swaying gently to the slow, haunting strains of her favorite song, the one she had often hummed late into the night as they worked side by side. Her head rested against his chest, his fingers tracing gentle circles along her back as he whispered promises of a lifetime together, his breath warm against her hair. The city lights flickered in the distance, a million tiny stars reflecting the warmth in their hearts, casting long, gentle shadows across the polished floors. It was a night of whispered confessions and stolen kisses, of dreams unfolding beneath a moonlit sky, their hearts beating in perfect harmony. It was the beginning of a beautiful chapter, the start of a life they would build together, one filled with quiet mornings, shared laughter, and the kind of love that could weather any storm. The early days of their marriage had been a dream, a seamless blend of passion and quiet, companionship, each moment a reminder of the bond they had forged. As the months passed, their love deepened, woven together by the promise of forever. Then one cool autumn morning, Emily held Alexander's hand, her eyes shimmering with the kind of joy that only comes with a whispered secret. She placed his hand gently on her belly, a tender smile breaking through her tears. "We're going to have a baby," she whispered, her voice trembling with a mix of fear and excitement. In that instant, the world seemed to stop, every worry, every lingering shadow from his past melting into the warmth of that tiny, unspoken heartbeat beneath his palm. As her belly grew round with the promise of new life, Alexander found himself transforming from a shrewd businessman into a man utterly devoted to his family. He became fiercely protective, often accompanying Emily to her doctor's appointments, holding her hand tightly as they watched the tiny flicker of their child's heartbeat on the ultrasound screen. He read every book he could find about fatherhood, his heart swelling with anticipation each time he imagined the tiny feet that would soon echo through their halls, the gentle coos that would fill their quiet mornings. When the day finally arrived, it was as though the heavens themselves paused to witness the miracle. The hospital room felt sacred, every beep of the monitor a reminder of life's fragile beauty. Alexander clutched Emily's hand, whispering words of encouragement as she labored through the pain, her face glowing with the fierce determination of a mother. And then, like the first breath of spring breaking through the cold grasp of winter, the room was filled with the piercing, perfect cry of their newborn daughter. The nurse placed the tiny, squirming bundle into Emily's trembling arms, and for a moment, the world outside ceased to exist. They named her Lily, a tribute to purity and grace, a living symbol of their love. She had her mother's bright blue eyes, the same shade that had captured Alexander's heart across countless boardrooms, and her father's gentle, knowing smile. In those first few days, Alexander often found himself awake in the middle of the night, standing beside the crib, watching his daughter breathe, her tiny chest rising and falling with the steady rhythm of a contented dreamer. He would reach down, his calloused, world-weary hands cradling her delicate frame, his heart swelling with a love he had never thought himself capable of. Her tiny fingers wrapped instinctively around his thumb, holding on with surprising strength, as if even at that tender age she understood that he was her protector, her hero. Their home transformed into a sanctuary of soft lullabies and whispered dreams, the walls echoing with the gentle hum of their shared hopes. Emily would often catch Alexander leaning over the crib, his eyes glistening with unshed tears as he marveled at the tiny life they had created. He would whisper promises to Lily as she slept, vowing to shield her from the harshness of the world, to give her a life filled with laughter and warmth, to always be the father she deserved. But life, unpredictable and often cruel, had its own plans. One quiet evening, as the fire crackled in the living room and the soft glow of candles bathed their home in a golden haze, Emily reached for his hand, her eyes distant, a flicker of longing shadowing her gaze. "I want to visit my mother," she said softly, her voice tinged with the nostalgia of childhood memories. Alexander looked into her eyes, seeing the yearning for simpler days, for the comfort of a mother's embrace. Without a moment's hesitation, he smiled, pressing a gentle kiss to her forehead. "This Sunday," he promised, his voice warm and reassuring, "we will go as a family." He had no way of knowing that those words, so casually spoken in a moment of peace, would soon become a haunting echo in the corridors of his shattered heart. The morning of their journey dawned with a gentle mist clinging to the mountains, the air crisp and tinged with the earthy scent of damp pine. Alexander packed the car with care, ensuring Lily's favorite blanket, soft and warm, was tucked beside her in the back seat. Emily, radiant and excited to revisit the comforting embrace of her childhood home, slipped into the passenger seat, her eyes sparkling with anticipation. As they wound their way out of the city, The buildings gradually gave way to dense forests and towering peaks, the road narrowing into a ribbon of asphalt, clinging precariously to the mountain's edge. The rain began as a soft drizzle, whispering against the windshield before escalating into a steady, relentless downpour. The rhythmic thud of the wipers struggled to keep pace with the storm, each swipe revealing only brief glimpses of the twisting, treacherous path ahead. The once comforting hum of the engine took on a nervous edge as the tires splashed through deepening puddles, the road growing slick beneath them. Alexander gripped the steering wheel tightly, his knuckles white against the leather as he leaned forward, squinting through the water-streaked glass. Emily reached over, placing a reassuring hand on his arm, her touch a gentle reminder of the life they had built together. She turned to check on Lily, their daughter nestled peacefully in her car seat, her tiny head leaning against the side, the blanket Alexander had so carefully packed, pulled snug around her. For a moment, the tension in his shoulders eased, and he managed a small, grateful smile. But then, as they approached a particularly sharp bend in the road, the tires suddenly lost their grip, hydroplaning across the wet asphalt. The car swerved violently, its back end fishtailing as Alexander fought to regain control. The world around them seemed to slow, every detail seared into his mind with painful clarity. The wide-eyed terror on Emily's face, the sharp intake of her breath, the helpless whimper of their daughter as the car shattered through the flimsy metal guardrail. Gravity seized them, yanking the vehicle into a wild, careening descent down the steep, rocky slope. Trees and boulders whipped past in a blur, the metal frame of the car screeching and groaning as it crumpled against the unyielding landscape. Finally, with a bone-jarring crash, the car came to rest against a jagged outcrop of rock, steam hissing from the twisted remains of the engine as the rain continued its merciless assault. Inside, the world had gone eerily silent, the once comforting warmth of the family vehicle now a crumpled, shattered cage. Alexander's head lolled against the steering wheel, his vision swimming in a haze of red as blood trickled down his face, his body a mass of bruises and broken bones. His last flicker of consciousness caught the sight of Emily, her delicate form slumped lifelessly against the cracked window, her chest still, her eyes closed forever to the storm outside. But fate, cruel and unpredictable, had intervened in another way. Lily, fragile and impossibly small, had been thrown clear of the wreckage, her tiny body cushioned by the soft embrace of the blanket Alexander had so carefully tucked around her. She lay in the wet grass, her piercing cries cutting through the storm, her face scrunched in terror and confusion, a lone survivor amid the twisted metal and shattered glass. A shadow moved through the rain, a figure shrouded in darkness, drawn by the faint, desperate wail of the infant. It was a woman, her hair matted and her clothes hanging loosely on her thin frame, her eyes hollow and wild with the ache of longing. She stumbled toward the sound, her bare feet slipping in the mud as she crested the ridge and looked down upon the wreckage. Her gaze locked on to the tiny, shivering form of the child. And in that instant, a desperate, irrational hope flared in her heart. A chance at the family she had been cruelly denied. She reached down, scooping the infant into her trembling arms, her thin body curling protectively around the baby as she staggered back into the shadowed depths of the forest, disappearing before the first rescue lights pierced the gloom. Hours later, the emergency crews arrived, their flashlights cutting harsh, white lines through the rain-soaked darkness. They found Alexander first, his pulse weak but steady, his breath coming in shallow, ragged gasps. They carefully extracted him from the crumpled remains of the car, their gloved hands moving quickly to stabilize his battered frame. Further down the slope, they discovered Emily's body, her once vibrant spirit snuffed out in the violent chaos of twisted metal and shattered glass. Of the baby, there was no sign, only a damp, dirt-streaked blanket tangled in the wet underbrush, slowly soaking up the rain. The sterile white walls of the hospital room felt like a cruel, unending prison, each passing second a reminder of the shattered life Alexander now faced. The faint, antiseptic scent of alcohol and the steady, mechanical beeping of nearby monitors became his constant companions, filling the hollow, echoing spaces where his wife's laughter and his daughter's innocent coos once lived. His body, though mending, remained a patchwork of bruises and scars, each pulse of pain a bitter reminder of the crash that had stolen everything from him. The days blurred into each other, a relentless, monotonous march of dull sunrises and equally bleak sunsets, the curtains always drawn, casting his world in an unending twilight. At first, his mind drifted in and out of awareness, his thoughts scattered and fragile, like the shattered glass that had once surrounded him in the twisted wreckage. Fleeting images of Emily's radiant smile and Lily's tiny, perfect fingers haunted his fractured memories, each one slipping through his grasp like sand through clenched fists. Nightmares plagued his sleep, the screech of metal against rock and the bone-chilling silence that followed, the echoes of his own helpless screams ringing in his ears as he thrashed against the crisp, white sheets. Nurses would rush in, their voices gentle but firm, their hands cool and efficient as they eased his battered body back against the pillows, whispering soothing words he could no longer believe. As the weeks dragged on, his physical wounds began to close, the deep gashes knitting together beneath sterile bandages, but the deeper, unseen scars in his mind remained raw and unhealed. His family visited often in the early days, their faces drawn and pale, their voices hushed and cautious as they stood by his bedside, uncertain of what he remembered or how much he could bear to hear. They brought flowers and cards, their bright colors and cheerful messages clashing painfully with the grey fog that clung to his every thought. He would stare at the bouquets without really seeing them, his mind lost in the dark, twisting corridors of memory. Then one cold, rainy afternoon, as the distant rumble of thunder shook the hospital's concrete walls, a flicker of clarity pierced the fog. He had been staring blankly out the rain-streaked window, the city below a blurred canvas of motion and light, when a sudden, heart-stopping image surged to the forefront of his mind. The sharp, desperate intake of Emily's breath as the car skidded out of control, the terrified wail of his daughter as metal crumpled around them. His heart raced, his pulse pounding in his ears, drowning out the steady beeping of the monitors as the memories crashed back into him, brutal and unforgiving. He turned to the nurse who had just entered to check his vitals, his voice a rough, broken whisper, his hands trembling as he reached for her sleeve. "My wife. My daughter. Where are they? Did they?" He could not force the final damning words past his cracked, dry lips, his chest heaving as panic clawed its way up his throat. The nurse's eyes widened, her gaze flicking nervously to the door before she hurriedly excused herself, her footsteps fading down the sterile, echoing hallway. Minutes later, his brother entered the room, his face a mask of grief and forced composure, his steps slow and measured as he approached the bed. He sat down heavily in the chair beside Alexander, his broad shoulders slumping beneath the weight of the words he had come to deliver. He reached out, his calloused hand gently gripping Alexander's trembling one, his eyes brimming with a sorrow too deep for words. "Alex," he began, his voice rough, thick with unspoken pain. They didn't make it. The rescue team, they found Emily, but Lily, she's gone too. They said no one else could have survived that crash." For a moment the world seemed to tilt violently, the walls closing in, the air growing thin and suffocating. Alexander felt his heart shatter into 1,000 jagged pieces, each one slicing deeper into his soul as the truth took root, choking the last fragile remnants of hope from his shattered mind. He sank back against the pillows, his breath coming in short, agonized gasps, his eyes staring unseeingly at the harsh, fluorescent lights above. His brother's grip tightened, but the touch felt distant, disconnected, as if his body no longer belonged to him, as if he had become nothing more than a hollow, broken shell. Tears streamed unchecked down his bruised, unshaven cheeks, soaking into the stiff, sterile sheets that now felt like a shroud, wrapping him in the cold, unrelenting grip of grief. His mind screamed against the finality of it, his heart lurching with the unbearable weight of loss as he imagined his wife's lifeless form, the sweet, innocent smile of his baby girl, forever silenced beneath a blanket of twisted metal and shattered glass. He curled into himself, his body trembling with the force of his sobs, each one tearing from his chest like a wounded animal's final desperate cry. He was no longer the powerful, confident man he had once been, but a broken, grieving father, a husband lost in a world without his family, condemned to wander the cold, empty halls of memory for the rest of his days. The years had not been kind to Alexander. The once vibrant, optimistic man had withered beneath the crushing weight of grief, his heart hardened into a cold, unyielding shell as the world around him continued its relentless march forward. His days became a blur of boardrooms and balance sheets, his nights a quiet, suffocating void where memories whispered through the darkness, taunting him with images of the life he had lost. His reflection in the polished glass walls of his towering office revealed a stranger, a man with deep lines etched into his once youthful face, streaks of grey threading through his dark hair, his eyes hollow, haunted by the ghosts of those he could not save. 5 long years had passed since the accident, each one stretching into the next, a relentless procession of empty, meaningless days. Alexander had buried himself in work, the empire he had built expanding with each passing quarter, his name becoming synonymous with power and wealth. Yet the void in his heart remained unfilled. He had become a silent, brooding figure at company gatherings, his laughter a distant memory, his once generous spirit now hidden behind a carefully constructed wall of indifference. His family, those who had once surrounded him with warmth and concern, had slowly drifted away, their calls and visits growing infrequent as the years wore on, unable to breach the icy barrier he had erected around his broken heart. One grey, overcast morning, a business deal drew him to a small town far from the glass and steel of his corporate fortress. He arrived with little interest in the scenic views and quaint cobbled streets, his mind focused solely on the cold, calculated numbers of his latest acquisition. The meeting ended swiftly, his sharp, precise words cutting through the hesitant optimism of the local businessman, his handshake firm but devoid of warmth as he finalized the deal. As he stepped out into the crisp autumn air, adjusting the collar of his expensive tailored coat, a sound reached his ears that stopped him in his tracks. A faint, trembling strain of music drifting through the narrow, winding streets. It was the delicate, heart-wrenching sound of a violin, the notes rising and falling with a haunting familiarity that sent a sharp, unexpected pain lancing through his chest. He turned slowly, his polished shoes clicking softly against the damp cobblestones as he followed the melody, his breath catching in his throat as memories stirred, long buried and half forgotten. He rounded a corner, and there, beneath the fading light of a rusted street lamp, stood a small girl, her head bowed over a tiny, well-worn violin, her delicate fingers coaxing the instrument to life with surprising grace. She couldn't have been more than 5 years old, her hair a cascade of golden curls that caught the dim, flickering light, her small frame swaying gently with the rhythm of her song. For a moment the world seemed to tilt, the street around him fading into the shadows as the notes wound their way into his soul, each one a ghostly echo of the lullabies Emily had once sung to him on quiet, rain-soaked nights. His heart pounded painfully against his ribs, his pulse a frantic, disjointed beat in his ears as he took a hesitant step closer, his polished shoes splashing through a shallow puddle, the cold water seeping into his expensive leather soles. The girl's eyes remained closed as she played, her small face a picture of concentration and innocence, her tiny fingers dancing across the strings with a skill far beyond her years. Alexander's throat tightened, his mind reeling as the melody reached its aching, mournful climax, the final note hanging in the damp, cool air like a whispered prayer. He fumbled in his coat pocket, his usually steady hand shaking as he pulled out his wallet, the crisp edges of $100 bill crackling in the quiet. He stepped forward, his polished shoe brushing against the battered open violin case at the girl's feet, his hand trembling as he released the bill, letting it flutter down to rest atop the scattered coins and crumpled bills. The girl's eyes snapped open wide and startled, their bright, piercing blue locking onto his own for a brief, heart-stopping moment. He felt his breath catch, his heart clenching painfully in his chest as something deep within him stirred, a forgotten, fragile hope flickering to life amid the ashes of his grief. "Play it again," he whispered, his voice rough and unsteady, the words clawing their way past the tight, aching knot in his throat. The girl hesitated, her small, delicate hand frozen on the neck of the violin, her wide eyes searching his face for a long, uncertain moment. Then slowly, she lifted the bow, drawing it once more across the strings, the haunting, familiar melody rising into the cool evening air, each note a dagger to his soul, a bitter-sweet echo of the life he had lost and the love he had thought forever beyond his reach. The cool evening air wrapped around them, carrying the faint, metallic scent of rain as the girl's delicate fingers coaxed the final, trembling notes from her violin. Alexander's mind raced, his pulse thundering in his ears as his gaze locked onto the small, dark circle on the girl's left arm, the birthmark that had been etched into his memory since the moment he first cradled his newborn daughter. Time seemed to slow, the world around him fading into a distant, indistinct blur as his knees buckled, and he sank to the damp, uneven pavement, his heart lurching wildly in his chest. He reached out, his hands trembling as they wrapped gently around the girl's tiny arm, the warmth of her skin beneath his fingers sending a shock of recognition through his battered soul. His breath came in shallow, ragged gasps, his chest tightening with a mixture of fear, hope, and disbelief as he forced the words past the tight, aching knot in his throat. "Lily," he whispered, his voice breaking into a desperate, breathless plea, his eyes searching her small, startled face for any flicker of familiarity. The girl's wide, bright blue eyes met his, their depths filled with innocent confusion as she froze beneath his touch, her small chest rising and falling rapidly as her heart raced in tandem with his. For a brief, agonizing moment, silence stretched between them, the distant hum of passing cars and the soft, rhythmic drip of rainwater from the nearby gutter, the only sounds in the world. Alexander felt his soul teeter on the edge of an abyss, his entire being balanced precariously on the fragile hope that the child before him was the daughter he had believed lost forever. As his tears fell, splashing against the girl's slender wrist, his mind flooded with memories. The first time he had held his baby girl, the warmth of her tiny body cradled against his chest, the way her small fingers had wrapped around his thumb with surprising strength. He remembered the gentle weight of her as he rocked her to sleep, the soft, cooing sounds she made as she snuggled into the crook of his arm, her perfect, cherubic face framed by a halo of golden curls. His heart clenched painfully as he thought of Emily, her eyes bright with love as she sang softly to their daughter, her voice a soothing balm that had once filled their home with warmth and light. He had lost them both in a single, devastating instant, his world shattered beyond repair. Or so he had believed. But now, as he knelt before this small, fragile girl, his heart dared to hope once more, the icy walls he had built around his grief cracking and splintering beneath the force of his newfound conviction. Slowly, the girl's fearful expression softened, her small head tilting to the side as if sensing something in his gaze, a distant, half-remembered warmth that stirred a flicker of recognition in her young heart. She did not pull away, her slender frame swaying slightly as she remained rooted in place, her violin hanging loosely in her other hand, its strings still vibrating faintly from the force of her final, trembling note. "Lily," he whispered again, his voice thick with emotion as his hands tightened gently around her arm, his thumbs tracing the small, dark circle of the birthmark with a reverence that bordered on disbelief. His vision blurred as fresh tears filled his eyes, spilling over his lashes to streak down his unshaven cheeks, mingling with the cool rain that now began to fall in earnest, soaking through his expensive coat and dripping from his silver-streaked hair. He pulled the girl into his arms, his body racked with silent sobs as he pressed his face into her golden curls, the soft, familiar scent of her hair, filling his senses and grounding him in a reality he had long thought lost. The girl stiffened at first, her small, delicate hands pressing uncertainly against his broad, heaving shoulders. But as his tears warmed her cool, rain-dampened skin, she relaxed, her tiny fingers curling into the fabric of his coat, her head resting against his chest as she instinctively sought the comfort and protection his embrace offered. Alexander's heart soared, the jagged, broken pieces of his soul slowly knitting back together as he held his daughter close, his body trembling with the overwhelming bittersweet flood of relief and gratitude that surged through him. He whispered her name over and over, his breath coming in short, uneven gasps as he pressed, desperate, reverent kisses to her forehead, her cheeks, her tiny hands, each touch a silent, fervent prayer of thanks to whatever cruel but merciful force had returned his daughter to him. He felt her small arms wrap hesitantly around his neck, her tiny body relaxing into his embrace, as if some deep, primal part of her recognized the man who had once cradled her so tenderly in the earliest days of her life. As the rain continued to fall around them, mingling with his tears and washing away the grime and sorrow of the past 5 years, Alexander felt the darkness that had consumed his heart begin to lift, the crushing weight of grief giving way to a fragile, flickering light. The street around them, once a bleak, indifferent backdrop to his endless, lonely days, now felt alive with possibility, the cool air tingling against his damp skin as the sounds of the bustling city faded into a distant, unimportant hum. He closed his eyes, his lips still pressed to his daughter's damp golden curls, his heart beating strong and steady for the first time in years as he whispered the only words that mattered. "I found you," he breathed, his voice a broken, grateful whisper that drifted into the cool, rain-soaked night. "I found you, my Lily, my sweet, precious Lily." And for the first time in half a decade, the world felt right once more, a father's shattered heart made whole by the miraculous return of his lost melody.